Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. ObserveIT enables security teams to detect risky user activity, investigate incidents in minutes, and effectively respond. Get your free trial at observeit.com/securityweekly. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. We are running two surveys currently. The first is the 5 stages of automation maturity. The second, which will be a webcast that will be airing in November based on our survey results. So get in there and tell us anonymously about your automation security maturity. The second is our annual listener feedback survey. We want to hear from you, the listener, about what you like, what you don't like here in the network, so we can make changes and learn a little bit about our audience as well. Again, anonymously. We don't even, I don't know, do we collect email address? I think it's usually optional. Like if you want to give us your email address and have a conversation with us or whatever, or not, that's fine too. I don't really need to know who you are.
No, we want valid feedback, and the reason is we heard a lot of things from last year's survey and things we've implemented this year around finding content, right? The ability on the new website to sort and filter and find things that you're looking for. We've made that much easier to consume our data. The listener interest list, that will start to move into the member site for us to notify you when content of interest is posted, so you can get an email alert saying, hey, new segments posted. Those are the types of things we're trying to improve, and that's all based on last year's survey. So where do we go next year?
And that's all on the website. You can go to securityweekly.com, click the survey menu, and find those surveys. Our guest for this segment, my teleprompter is really slow, is Erich Anderson. He serves as a professional consultant for ObserveIT, who brings experienced information security knowledge of over 15 years around insider threats and cyber security. You can find out more and learn more about ObserveIT at observeit.com/securityweekly. Erich, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
You know, it's interesting, Erich, working with ObserveIT and talking about insider threats. Anytime I consume movies and TV, when there's any kind of insider threat, I always relate it back to what we've talked about in our conversations here on the show and what ObserveIT does. So I find more and more references every day. Rogue One. Rogue One is the classic. I mean, it is the classic
right?
tale.
You think about Jen Erso and Cassian and getting down the Death Star plans, and just it's relevant across Hollywood, across TV shows, and the insider threat is just part of community and culture today. So talking about it has become a lot easier, and I'm always happy to share experiences.
And one of the things that you want to talk about was kind of carving out the different types of roles and personas as it relates to insider threat. And you defined authorities, process, staff, and operations. If you could expand upon that and help us kind of create these different categories, if you will, of folks in your organization.
Yeah, so kind of dating back to federal government days, when we were establishing the national policy for insider threat and going through what organizations and the federal government had to do to actually get programs off the ground and start to not only correlate what their people were doing, but like the authorities that they had to deal with. So we always started with governance. So what authorities did an organization have to not only seek the data, but to monitor employees? And then moving on from there, right? What types of process do we have to establish? What types of reports do we have to regulate? And then just the whole response realm on top of that. So translate that into corporate goes pretty nicely, right? So if we can take the same type of objectives that we learned in the federal government and apply it to our corporate policies and corporate culture, it should pan out pretty nicely. And I've always looked at insider threat as a enabler for an organization, right? Quite often you think of insider threats as being negative, right? That has a negative impact. You look at all the data breaches and you look at the stats of seeing how many data breaches are actually caused by insiders, and it's pretty telling that there is a problem. But good insider threat programs are there to help mitigate those issues and also to help bring some empowerment towards an organization. So I think that's the benefit of having a program and having all these authorities and processes in place.
So, Eric, when you think about authorities in the corporate world, is it the board in the C-suite? Are they the authorities in this model then that have to set kind of the governance and policies around tracking and monitoring for insider threat? Is that what you mean by authorities in who they are in the corporate world?
Yeah, so again, going back to government, right, we really strive to make sure that the senior official, in the case for the federal government, right, that'd be the director or the head of the agency, really in charge and responsible for insider threat. And that authority level at the corporate level, right, is the CEO or the board of directors. And having some type of senior official, senior presence from an insider threat point of view is needed at the C levels and the board types of viewpoints. So yes, definitely at that level.
Are you seeing both the C-suite, the CEO, and the boards more interested in insider threat? I know we've seen trends of cybersecurity as a whole getting more visibility at the board, but is insider threat part of that broader program? And you know, the board's really looking for processes and the rest of the things you talked about at the board level. Is that a hot topic right now?
It is, yeah, and it's kind of surprising. I do a few talks during the month sometimes at different corporations just to educate them on insider threat and some of the risk. And I ask about like annual reports. It's pretty common to have some type of cybersecurity annual report, right? This is how many like blocks we had at the firewall level. This is how many external attacks we might have potentially mitigated. And I ask like, well, what about insider threat? Like, what type of viewability does that have at the corporate level? And I'm starting to get a lot of good responses saying, yes, we're actually required now to report upon our insider threat program, right? The type of resources we need, type of tooling we might need, and really try to get ownership from across the corporation. So I think it is gaining, and I think the board is definitely asking questions about it because they see the bottom line impacts. So definitely, I think a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, because without that authority, that kind of governance capability, the rest of this can't move forward, right? I'm not going to build the right processes. I'm not going to hire the right staff. I'm not going to have the right incident response operational plans in place to respond to these insider threats. So it really starts with the board and the CEO really taking a focus on this so the other three components can actually get built out.
Exactly. Yep. And really, what you look for them from that standpoint is, right, how are we protecting not only company assets, but employee assets? So having that top-down direction towards the staff saying, like, we are going to have some monitoring places out there, right? We're going to be looking at what you're doing, but we're not really doing that to get into your personal business or seeing what's going on. We're there to help protect not only your work, but the company's work. So having that voice, right, definitely helps out and lets the program be successful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and those processes I think are really important for the what I call like accidental. You probably have a better term for this, right? The accidental insider threat. The person, the employee, is not inherently malicious, but they make a mistake, or not even a mistake. They're just following a process or making up their own process because it doesn't exist, and that results in some type of exposure of some kind, right? Or something
they copy an Excel file, they mail it to their home address because they need to work on that file at home, or they plug in a USB drive and download some files and take them home so they can work at home, not realizing, not maliciously, but not realizing that now they could expose some of that data outside the organization.
I think it's really a data handling issue, right? Eric, do you see that those policies kind of coming into existence because of an insider threat program?
For sure, yep. And going back to Hollywood, you think about some of the newer movies from Avengers Endgame. You think about Nebula, and you think about the unintentional insider threat, right? You see basically a double persona there where Thanos was able to get access to Nebula's kind of current state in the future and be able to change the way that he was going to plan the rest of the movie. I don't want to ruin so many plots here, but the unintentional insider threat, right, is just a common thing that happens in business, right? Printing documents, saving Excel files, getting things to personal emails or personal storage places happens a lot. But usually employees don't think of implications that could happen because of that, right? You would like to think that all those areas are secured and proper and no one's going to be looking for them, but there's so many cases that, right, that's how compromises happen. And that's how we have to make sure that we're taking care of those types of loose ends and watching what's happening in those areas.
Yeah, I even just think employees knowing what data and how it should be handled, like knowing the data that you're working with could lead to some type of breach, and to handle that properly, right? Thinking of developers, right? Talk about IoT security, not building a back door in, right? Not leaving passwords or credentials around in source code and those kinds of things. The handling of credentials is essentially data or keys to access data, right? And having clear policies and procedures around that don't slow the business down. That's the key, right? Pun intended, right? To being able to have a program that protects against these things.
Right, exactly.
And that's the non-malicious side. Then you have the whole malicious side of the insider threat, right? I mean, we just talked about some scenarios. Now you have the malicious side of the insider threat, where they are actively trying to get data and get it out of the environment and into people's hands. And that's a whole different scenario, Eric, isn't it? When you think about how do you manage those types of scenarios?
For sure. And right, it is kind of wide ranging. Everything from initial hire all the way through that process, right? I know of cases where there's very good intent, even from like a foreign nation state, where infiltrating a certain corporation or even a government agency just to gain access to information to get back to a state-sponsored actor is so relevant today because it happens all the time, especially in education. You talk to universities and you talk about visa students, and you wonder like how much of the research and development from research and the research in the universities is going back to China and Russia, Iran, etc., and how they're going to use that information to either attack or exploit the United States or other people. So the malicious side of it is very relevant, and it becomes even worse when these insiders have access to your network, right? They have access to your data, they have access to your systems. The ability to execute an attack is so much easier.
Yeah, we've seen a lot on the espionage side from nation states, getting their folks into organizations to steal intellectual property and get that information out, or other key pieces of data.
Well, and I think that ties into the whistleblower, kind of aspect of it, is that if you're not the malicious insider, but you see that, is that typically where the whistleblower would come into play? And how is that handled in terms of process, laws, regulations, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think a commonly overlooked thing for insider threat programs is just whistleblowers, protections of whistleblowers, and what would you do in those types of scenarios? Right, whistleblowers are kind of out there to hold your organization accountable, right? I'm not saying that all whistleblowers are correct in all the claims that they may or may not file, but there has to be a process and a way to accommodate the whistleblower. An insider threat program should be that place to help validate, sustain, and actually enable people to call out some of the things that businesses are doing or not doing. So whistleblowers, I think, is something that organizations should have to think about. And when you start looking through a lot of the federal laws, right, a lot of the federal laws really protect federal employees when it comes to whistleblowing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have some of these other laws, like through OSHA, right? So if you're doing things in the health industry, in the environment industry, some of the financial industries, you have Sarbanes-Oxley that helps protect a lot of the financial assets. But outside of like some key industries, right, whistleblowing is usually something that's not protected. And what happens in those scenarios is that employees that want to blow the whistle or hold something accountable are retaliated against, right? There's usually long-standing lawsuits that happen between the corporation and the employee, and it's just not a good thing for reputations and the whole overall state of whistleblowing. So I think there's a lot more to be done here, but definitely something that should be considered.
When you think about a whistleblower program, Eric, for a second, I can see at least two scenarios, and there may be more, so I'd love your input on this. One is kind of an internal whistleblower program that would identify internally to an organization that something is going on that you might want to investigate because it could be espionage or something from one of your employees. But then I could see a different whistleblower scenario where the company is doing something malicious, right, and can never be handled internally because you're calling out the company itself. And in that scenario, if you're not in the federal government or covered by one of these other areas, there's really no place to go. Are those the two primary scenarios for whistleblowers?
Yeah, that's kind of how I think about it, right? So from like an individual point of view, right, how can you report something going on, not only to not be attributed back to you, so essentially establish a claim where you give enough information so you can start to research it. And you start to research it, you can uncover essentially the facts in that case. And the government, right, if it was a corporate entity, like, you had the National Security Agency lying about something, you had mechanisms to go towards other avenues to help with those investigations, right? So you can take it outside of the kind of the realm of those four walls of NSA and have, Congress or another intelligence agency actually look into what was going on. In the corporate sense, unless if you fall into those very niche categories for the different areas of whistleblowing, the health, the finance, the environment, things in those lines, right? There's not a whole lot to go to. So you have to really rely on either law enforcement or legal mechanisms to get those points made. But still, there should be some type of protocols where there's initial phases for employees to bring up things that they're concerned about. They should be able to do that at a non-attributable base and have basically a response back saying, hey, we've looked into your claims. These are the facts that we were able to find. Here's some next steps that you're going to be able to take either with us internally, or we recommend that you pursue an outside source.
Yeah, I remember when I worked nuclear power for 7.5 years, we had the ombudsman, and that was kind of our source to go to for raising concerns internally.
It's kind of like internal affairs.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, from the police force side.
Right.
It was this independent office that was there for people to go to. Now, we were also highly regulated in nuclear power, which is why that program existed. And so I would imagine a program similar to that in the corporate side where you kind of have this independent office that whistleblowers could go to get their concerns out there. They potentially do the research and then provide guidance. Are we thinking about ombudsman type programs for whistleblowers? Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. I think the ombudsman is a fair, right? It's a fair process where you have essentially a third party in the room to kind of handle the dispute, right? There's like the arbitrator of the group. So I think an ombudsman would be a pretty good idea to have established either through a third party for corporations, or it's just part of the corporate culture where you have someone to go to really get through these claims.
Yeah, you could almost make it this independent arm off of the board, right, that has this independence that allows this stuff to happen and then be able to kind of broker these claims back and forth. Because, again, the board has to understand the insider threat as a potential risk. And by having maybe this kind of program in place, it would inform the board even if there's stuff going on at the C-suite that the
Right.
board needs to know about, so that the board is not taken by surprise when, there's all kinds of insider activities going on.
But we've seen this with big tech companies as well, right? A company grows to a certain size, there's potential for a lot more of this activity to take place, and I think employees need a place to safely report that. We've all seen the articles about uprisings at Google and whatnot, and other, not to pick on Google, but other tech companies as well.
Yeah, I mean, Cambridge Analytica was another
right in the
potential
Facebook
case, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we covered whistleblowers. Anything else on the topic of insider threat as it relates to some of these interesting aspects, such as whistleblowers and categorization, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, the realm for insiders is so massive when you start to think of all the different things you have to capture. I always look at insider threat as almost like the recycling people of the security industry, right? This is where essentially the rubber hits the road, and you're going to be testing almost from an external audit point of view how your internal policies, how your internal security measures and controls are actually working, because these are the people who are going to be triaging through the different cases and the different data sets regarding what your organization is doing from an operational standpoint. So, the more we can do to better the security, the more that we can do to start enabling the sharing of information, the collaboration amongst the people within the organization for insider threat purposes, right? Having to focus on your employees and contractors, I think the better off the whole industry is going to be.
Yeah, I would imagine if you're a public company and you're under the scrutiny of the SEC, there's definitely avenues, right? I'm thinking through, I just saw an article about in California, a solar company was cooking the books, right? And they were auctioning off a bunch of classic cars, which is what caught my attention when I read it. And I'm thinking, here are executives in this company cooking books, basically scamming like $1 billion from investors, right? Because they're privately held, because they're in this environment, there's nothing that requires this type of whistleblower activity. I think to your point, Eric, is that outside of certain areas, this stuff it's not regulated, it's not required, and therefore these kinds of things can continue to happen. And I don't know if it's a state or a federal thing, but there's just, without having some formalized requirements around it, I think you're going to continue to see these types of activities.
Yeah, I totally agree. I definitely think there should be more, both federal and state laws mandating organizations do things internally to protect not only their employees, their investors, but the general public from these type of schemes. There's case after case of health frauds. There's case after case of people embezzling monies. There's really no oversight or no mechanisms to really hold people accountable until after the fact. The more that we can mitigate beforehand, and if we do that through laws, either more whistleblowing laws that help protect employees to report that type of information without retaliation, or just things that establish programs that have a good oversight mechanism will definitely help out.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen lots of examples in Hollywood for it, that's for sure. But yeah, there's no formal way to bring this to bear.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of what we talked about was regulations and policies, and the ability to monitor and report on those and enforce policies is where ObserveIT obviously comes in, which is an important piece. We didn't always have those kinds of tools.
No, we didn't.
At our disposal.
Right.
So.
Yeah, not back in the days I was doing this stuff in nuclear power, that's for sure. We didn't have these types of tools.
No, that reminds me too. We did a lot of, I'll say, closed government coding to create tools and mechanisms like ObserveIT and other companies have today, right? To have a good understanding from a visibility layer of what users are doing, and then to have it correlated against other data sets, right? We did a lot of that just closed source, and we had to develop it ourselves. And it's really great to see the software industry and the tech industry really, take a hold of this, because having organizations implement, commercial off-the-shelf software is a lot easier, it's better supported, and it just has a lot more benefits.
Yeah, now that we have the tools, we need the authorities to put the programs in place. Now you can start to tie the two together and have a much better way to manage insider threats, whistleblowers, and all things related.
Sure.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Well, our listeners can learn more at observeit.com/Security Weekly. Erich, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
And with that, we'll take a short break, come back with our next interview with Kevin O'Brien from Great Horn. Stay tuned.